Okay, Moadim L'Simcha, Chodesh Tov. So today's Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Nun Hey, Kiddushin 55. What does it say in that Daf Yomi? We're going to start on the top of Nun Hey Amid Aleph, on top of 55a. So we had said the position of Rebbe Meir, which is that if you try to betroth a woman with hektish, it doesn't work. But if you try to betroth her with shogeg, it does work. And we saw two explanations for Rabbi Yochanan, for Rabbi Meir's position, why it works for shogeg. One is that it's, according to Rav, it's talking about a discrete case of the Kohen, that the Kohen who was wearing his garments, that's not considered to be Me'ilah. The other possibility, as explained by the other possibility, as explained either by Ula in the name of Bar Pada, or else it's explained by Rabin in the name of Bar Pada, is that Rabbi Meir is of the position that the Mazid, the Hektish, is going to be deconsecrated, but Bishogeg, Rabbi Meir is of the position that it's not deconsecrated, and so therefore you can't betroth somebody with it. In this context, the Gemara is going to bring in a different Mishnah, which you will remember we had when we studied Mesechus Shkalim. So the Mishnah tells us, Tanan Hasam, Behema Shenimtzeis Mirushalayim Migdal Eder. So let's say you find an animal that was roaming around the suburbs of Jerusalem. Basically, Migdal Eder was around Bethlehem, some that distance. And so therefore, when you find animals roaming around there, you have to be concerned that maybe it came from Jerusalem. And most of the animals in Jerusalem were designated to be sacrifices. And so therefore, we have a concern that maybe this was designated as hektish, as temple property. And so therefore, if it's Migdal Eder Kumidas, so whole ruach in every direction, Zecharim Olos, if you find a male, then we're going to say that it's going to be considered like as though it was, since the olah could be brought, the male could be brought as an olah offering. We have to be concerned that maybe it's an olah, and the kevos zivchei shlamim, and the female offerings we have to be concerned that maybe it was designated as a carbon shlamim, and so therefore we don't know what to do with this animal, so we have to assume that this animal is either an olah if it's a male, or a female if it's a shlamim if it's a female. And so the Gemara says, wait, zecharim olas hu dahavi, zivche shlamim lo havi. A male can only be an olah, can't be a shlamim. We know that a male can be a shlamim also. So the Gemara's response to that is, Amar Rabbi Oshaya hacha b'bal lechov. No, we're talking about a situation that this animal, for sure, we're not going to bring it as an offering because we don't know exactly what it is. And this is what our Mishnah is saying. If this person comes and we have a good Jew, and he says, "Oh, I see this animal wandering around. It probably came from the temple, and therefore nobody's going to ever be able to eat this animal because this animal might be a carbon, and we can't do anything with this animal. So it's just a waste of society." And he says, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do good for the whole world. I'm going to be the savior. I'm going to be the hero." So he says, "I'm going to pay to the temple the value of this animal, which we're not sure about. And so therefore, I'm going to redeem it, give its full value to the temple, and in exchange, I'll take this animal." So therefore, if it's a male, he's going to have to pay for its olah, because maybe it's an olah, and also its shlamim. And if it's a female, he only has to pay for the shlamim because a female animal can't be brought as an olah. So that's what Rabbi Oshaya says. And this is what he's saying. That if it's a male, we have to be concerned that it's an olah. And it goes according to the position of Rabbi Meir, the Amar, that this follows the position of Rabbi Meir, who he said back on the base, that you can actually deconsecrate an animal intentionally. And that's why Rabbi Meir said that if you try to betroth a woman purposely, the money will be deconsecrated and she'll be betrothed. And so therefore, Rabbi Meir says you can fix this animal by paying its money to the temple and thereby deconsecrating it. So this follows the position of Rabbi Meir, the Amar Hektish b'Meizim Mischalo. And so therefore, that's what he has to do. He has to give the value of two things, the value of twice this animal. One will be for an oil, one will be for a shlamim, and thereby he deconsecrates it. And that's the solution to this problem. Gemara says, wait, not so fast. Not so fast. We know that Rabbi Meir allows you to deconsecrate something from the temple if it is what's called Kedushas Bedek Habayis, but does he even allow you to deconsecrate it when it's Kedushas Haguf? There's two types of ways things can be consecrated to the temple. One is if it's their value, like just money that was given to the temple, and the other is if the item itself was going to be used in the service of the temple, like, for example, an animal or a utensil that was being used. So the Gemara is telling us that when Rameir says you can deconsecrate it, that is when Rameir says you can deconsecrate something with intentional use, that's only by Kedushas Bedek Habayis, but not also Kedushas Haguf. Kedushas Haguf, if the animal itself was meant to be offered, are you able to be mischal? Can it be deconsecrated? So, Vatanan, didn't we learn in the Mishnah in Me'ilah, Ein Moel Achar Moel, that b'Mukdashin, that you can never have two Me'ilas by something that's sacred, because one time, the first time you do it, the first time you misappropriate it, you take it out of the temple property. The only time you could do this is by Behema Uklisharis Bavad, by an animal and by a utensil, since those things are Kedushas Haguf. Therefore, you can commit multiple me'ilas. So if that's the case, it means it can't be deconsecrated. So when the mayor says his law that you can deconsecrate something only by something that is not Kedushas Haguf. But if it was Kedushas Haguf, he wouldn't say it. And so as explains in the Mishnah, let's say you're riding on an animal that's the temple property, and if you ride and then your friend rides in, then your friend rides it, you're all considered to be misusing temple property because you haven't deconsecrated. So we see from here that in this case, he does not allow you to deconsecrate it. So how can we say that this is the position of Rabbi Meir? So the Gemara explains, that Mishnah in the Me'ilah, which says that it doesn't get deconsecrated, that's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Ahi Rabbi Yehuda. That's the position of Rabbi Yehuda. It went from the fact that it says, Ein mo achar mo. I'm reading the Rashi. So when it says that there's no Me'ilah after Me'ilah, we see from here, we're going to say, when it says in the first Mishnah, when it says in that Mishnah that there's no Me'ilah after Me'ilah, it means that the first one, right away when you use it, it goes out, it leaves its status, even though it was done b'shogeg. Meaning to say that even though you did it b'shogeg, it left its status. Because if it was done purposely, Rabbi Meir says it's not, Rabbi Yehuda says it's not Me'ilah. And so therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is telling us, this follows the position of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, who says that if you do it b'shogeg, then it's going to leave its status. But if you do it b'mezid, it doesn't leave its status. So the Gemara says, no, from the fact, we can't say that. We can now, from the fact that this is Rabbi Yehuda, we can also learn what Rabbi Meir's position is. Ha Rabbi Meir, so it's saying, Hahi Rabbi Yehuda, that Mishnah in Me'ilah is the position of Rabbi Yehuda, and Ha Rabbi Meir, whereas the Mishnah in Mishkalim, which refers to an animal that was found, and there we say that in every direction, and you could deconsecrate it, that's the position of Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah in Shkolm is the position of Rabbi Meir, who says Hektish can be deconsecrated, but Mezid, even Kedushas Haguf. So therefore, the Mishnah in Shkolm could be Rabbi Meir, and the Mishnah in Me'ilah is Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, but still, neither Rabbi Yehuda, Nishmal, or Rabbi Meir. From the fact of what Rabbi Yehuda's position is, we should be able to derive what Rabbi Meir's position is. From the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says that if you intentionally try to deconsecrate it, Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't work. It only works b'shogeg. So we'll learn from here. Lav Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Doesn't Rabbi Yehuda say hektish b'shogeg mischal, that when Rabbi Huda says that if you deconsecrate it accidentally, it becomes deconsecrated. Vikdushas haguf lo mischal. But if it was something that was kedushas haguf, in the case of Rabbi Huda says if multiple people run on the animals, it's not deconsecrated. So don't we see from here where Rabbi Meir Nami afagav de hektish b'meizim mischal, even though Rabbi Meir says that if it was deconsecrated intentionally, it becomes deconsecrated. Shouldn't he still say, like Rabbi Yehuda, kedushas haguf or mischal, that the essential animal, if the animal itself was consecrated, that can't be deconsecrated. From the fact that Rabbi Yehuda says that kedushas haguf is not deconsecrated even b'shogeg, so when Rabbi Meir says that kedushas haguf is deconsecrated, he wouldn't say that by a case of kedushas haguf. So even though Rabbi Meir says that hektish is deconsecrated, he shouldn't say that in the case of kedushas haguf. Gemara says no. The distinction is why does Rabbi Yehuda say that by shogeg it's not deconsecrated if it's kedushas haguf? Excuse me. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say that in the case of shogeg it's not deconsecrated if it's kedushas haguf? Because there was no intent to deconsecrate it, and so therefore it doesn't apply to the kedushas haguf. So therefore he says. So he says, but but in the case of Rabbi Meir, where he says that if it's b'mezid, it comes deconsecrated, therefore it even works by kedushas haguf because that was your intent. Meaning to say that the deconsecration of Rabbi Meir is stronger than the deconsecration of Rabbi Yehuda because there's actual intent to deconsecrate it. So therefore, it even applies by kedushas haguf. So the Gemara says, "Well, Amor the Shamas Leo Rabbi Meir b'kache kachim." Okay, so fine. I know that Rabbi Meir says by kache kachim you could deconsecrate something with your full intent. Even by mezid you could deconsecrate something, and even by kedushas haguf. But maybe he only says that by kache kachim, where it's the holiest of all the sacrifices, like a chatas or an asham or an olah. But b'kache kalam mishamas, how do we know he says it also by kache kalam, by a lesser form? And so why would we think he only says it by kache kachim? Because that's where the pasuk of Me'ilah is referring to. And so therefore, maybe that's the only time he says you could deconsecrate it. So the Gemara says, Amar Lei. Hold on one second. So they respond to that teaching. Amar Lei, Hahu Mirabanan Rabbi Yaakov Shemei. So there was one of the rabbis there, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov. He responds, Kal v'chomer kache kachim mischalim kache kalim u'kolshkein. Well, if we say something like kache kachim, which is even holier, if Rabbi Meir says that can be deconsecrated, for sure the kache kalim, which is a lesser form of holiness, for sure that can be deconsecrated. And indeed, Rabbi Meir would say in Mernami Amar B'chama Bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Yossi. By the way, it's not really Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Akiva, it's Rabbi Chama bar Ukva, because we never heard of Rabbi Akiva having a son Chama. He had a son Yoshua, so that's why they changed the text. So Amar Rabbi Chama bar Ukva, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Omar Ya Rabbi Meir hektish b'meizim mischal b'shogeg mischal. What's the teaching of Rabbi Meir? He says intentional hektish can be deconsecrated, but if it's accidental, it can't be deconsecrated. Whether it's, and he applies it both by kachi kachim and also by kachi kalam. And how do we know it applies by kachi kalam? For sure, it works by kachi kalam. So the Gemara says, Taiba Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan was shocked by this. Rabbi Yochanan is now going back to the answer of Rabbi Oshaya, because remember, we start off our discussion today with the Mishnah from Shkolim about an animal that's wandering around Jerusalem. And so we said that if it's a male, it's being deconsecrated. We assume it's an Olah. And if it's a female, we assume it's a Shlomim. And it comes along Rabbi Oshaya, and the Gemara says, what do you mean? A male, it has to be an Olah, and the male could also be a Shlomim. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Oshaya comes along and says, no, we're talking about is a man found this animal, and he wants to be a hero. And how's he a hero? He's going to pay the value, if it's a male, to the temple of both an Ola and a Shlomim. So the Gemara asks a tremendous question. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he says, You mean to say Rabbi Oshai is saying that this person is a hero? Do we really tell a person to come along and do this sin by deconsecrating this animal on purpose, even though it has no blemish, so that everybody else should be able to have a fix and that they could bring this carbon? But you're not allowed to deconsecrate an animal because it says in the Torah, meaning to say only a behemoth that has a blemish can you redeem it. But if this animal has is pure, has no blemish, then you're not allowed to redeem it. So why do we tell this person to commit this sin? So therefore, even though it would be deconsecrated, it would be a sin to do it. So why would you say that this is what we're telling the person to do it? So therefore comes along Rabbi Yochanan and says, no, what you can't do, he explains what our Mishnah is saying. Rabbi Yochanan, when the Mishnah says that you redeem it if it's a male, we assume it's an olah, we wait until it gets a blemish. And once the animal gets a blemish, then you're allowed to redeem it. And then you bring two animals. One is you bring two animals that have no blemish, and one of them you say this will be an olah in its place, and the other one will be a shlamim. And you say if the animal that you found, this one is the olah, and if the animal that you found, and the second will be a shlamim, and if the animal that you found was a shlamim, you say that this one will be a shlamim, and the other animal will be a voluntary olah. So the Gemara now analyzes this statement from the Mishnah in Shkolim that if you find an animal wandering around outside of Jerusalem in the suburbs, Amar Zechoram Olos, that if it's a male, we assume it's an Olos. So the Gemara says, Dilma Todehi. But the Gemara says, well, maybe it's a Thanksgiving offering. That's another type of animal. And so therefore, he's not bringing it for its proper usage. You also have to bring a carbon toda. Carbon toda could come from a sheep, a goat, or cattle. And a unique quality of the carbon toda, like we saw in 2 days ago's daf, was it has to be accompanied by 40 loaves of bread. And it also has to be eaten within 24 hours. You have till the next morning only to eat it. So the Gemara says the Maisi Nami Toda. Yeah, our Mishnah is saying that you also bring an additional animal, and that's going to be brought as a Toda. And so therefore, that's what you have to bring. So the Gemara says, but doesn't the carbon toda also require bread? The Maisi Nami Lechem. Well, you also bring bread along with it. The Gemara says, it's possible that this animal that was found is going to be a carbon asham. Asham is there are 6 types of carbonos that are brought as an asham. It's translated usually as a guilt offering. Asham has 6 types of offering. One is if you swear falsely, that if they ask you for money, you have to bring what's called an asham gezela. You have to bring a sacrifice and pay back the person plus 1/5. Asham mi'uos, that's if you benefit from misappropriated temple property. Asham shifcha charufa, this is a person brings if he has if he has a relationship with a female slave who is a half slave and half designated to a Hebrew slave. And the fourth is Asham Nazir. This is what a Nazir who is Tameh, after he becomes Tahor, he counts as Naziris, and he brings an Asham Nazir. And then there's Asham Mitzorah, when he's healed from his Saras. And then there's the Asham Tawai, if he's not sure if he did a sin which is liable for kares. So those are the 6 types of Asham. So it's possible that this animal that he finds is a carbon Asham. And the most carbon asham come from a male ram, except for the Mitzorah and the Nazir, which they bring. So most of them come from a carbon asham from a male ram, which is older than a year. But the Mitzorah and the asham, they come from a male that's within its first year. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, no, the asham is older. And the asham is in its second year. Asham ben shtei shanim, and so therefore it wouldn't be an asham. The Gemara says v'ishtakach ben shana, and the carbon that we found, that the person found, was in its first year, and so therefore you can't assume it's an asham. The Gemara says, yeah, but there are 2 ashamos that are found within their first year. What is that? The asham mitzorah and the asham nazir. If the nazir becomes tamei, or if the asham mitzorah that he also when he sealed, they have to bring a male within its first year. Gemara says, "Lo shchiche." These cases are not found, meaning to say, it's not. It's very uncommon that a nazir will become tummy by a dead body because he's going to be so careful about it, and so therefore, also the concept of tsaras is also uncommon because it's something miraculous. Tell us that this person is speaking lashon hara, and so therefore, and to get him to repent. And like the Rambam writes, that this is not the normal way of the world. And so therefore, these are things that are very uncommon, so we don't have to be concerned about it. Gemara says, Pesach, maybe it's the carbon Pesach. So Gemara says, a Pesach Bismano Mizar Zirabe. No, the Pesach, during its proper time, everybody will be careful to watch it. We don't have to be assumed that you're finding it wandering around as the carbon Pesach. Vishalo Bismano, and if it's not the time of our Pesach, Shlomim, we have a principle that after the carbon Pesach, if it was consecrated to be a carbon Pesach, after Pesach, and if it wasn't brought, it becomes a carbon Shlomim. Whereas since maybe it's a firstborn animal or a meiser. Well, the firstborn animal needs to be brought as a carbon, or a meiser, behema, that's also brought as an or a Shlomim. So, excuse me, a meiser behema is another halacha that if your 10th animal, the Torah tells us, you have to separate every 10th animal and bring it, and then what you have to do is you have to bring it to Jerusalem and bring it as a korban. So maybe that's what this is. The Gemara says, well, no. Well, why do you need to know if it's these korbanos? Well, but those animals, the Meister Behema, and the firstborn animal, if they get a blemish, actually you don't have to redeem them. You can eat them straight out. The Kohen could eat. Everyone could actually eat those animals once they get their blemish. And then there are just certain things that you can't eat certain parts of it. You can't eat the tongue, for example, because it's supposed to be given to the Kohen. So those are specific. They have certain aspects of holiness, and is meaning to say that you're not allowed to shech them. The Gemara tells us that you need to, you can't suck them in the marketplace, and you can't weight them measure for measure, but you have to estimate. These are specific aspects of the Kedusha that remains, but you're allowed to eat them. So therefore it doesn't apply there. So the Gemara says, Amar, we learned in the Mishnah, the Kevos Zivche Shlamim, that the female animals go to be a korban Shlamim. But Dilma Todi, again, aren't we concerned that maybe it's a Toda? Gemara says, the Maisi Toda. But don't we need bread? The Maisi Nami Lechem. You bring bread with it. Dilma Chatasi. Maybe it was a carbon Chatas. Why can we assume it's a Shlomim? A Chatas can come from a female. Gemara says, Chatas Bas Shnasa. V'ishtakach Bas Shteshanim. A carbon Chatas has to be within its first year. A female in the first year. And this case we're talking about is where it's 2 years old. And so there it's after its first year. So therefore you can't bring it as a carbon Chatas, only a Shlomim. The Gemara says, maybe you found this carbon that was a chatas after the first year passed, and that animal is not allowed to be eaten at all. That has to be allowed to die. Gemara says, no, that's not common, because once a person consecrates carbon chatas, he brings it immediately, and so we don't have to be concerned about that. So the Gemara says, Tanya Chananya ben Chakinai Omer Eiz Bas Shina. So let's say you have a goat within its first year, that goes to be a chatas. If you find a goat within its first year around Jerusalem, we assume it's a chatas. The Gemara says, "Chatas, are you going to say that it's a chatas? You can't bring it. So it's possible that he brought it for a shlamim or a toda. So how can you bring it as a chatas? And secondly, you would never, anyways, be able to bring it as a chatas, because the only person who could bring a chatas is the person who brought it himself." So the Gemara explains, Elamar Abaye kichatas, meaning to say it has the law of a chatas that you can't bring, because a chatas that you can't bring, there are 5 types of chatas that they can't be brought. These are called the law of the chamesh chatas. The halacha Moshe Sinai, we're not allowed to bring them. And what do we do with them? Konsel kipa. So if you find this goat within the first year, it's possible that it is a chatas, and therefore you have to stick it in a pen, and it dies on its own. And so therefore, that's the halacha. If you find this goat within the first year, that's what you have to do to it. Okay, we'll review this daf, obviously, this will be the daf we do on Shmini Atzeres before Simchas Torah. So this will be a daf, very, very holy. We'll read this daf just before we complete the Torah on on Shabbos afternoon, 5784. Shkoyach. If anybody has any questions, happy to